All right, good morning. It is Friday, June 6th, and I think we can say that conditions have certainly started to favor the professional grass growers this week. We had some pretty warm to extremely high temperatures, maybe not extreme, but very high temperatures in the northern Ohio part of the state earlier on in the week, and then we got heavy rainfall. And so that's kind of made it a little bit swampy, I think will be the conditions for us. Around the state, I think there's some variability with that, but certainly with the moisture after that burst of heat, grass is probably jumping out of the ground for the most part, not completely stressed yet. Online today, we've got Dr. Xiaowei Wu, Dr. Dave Shetlar, Dr. Dave Gardner, and Pamela Sherratt, and Todd Hicks. Dr. Gardner, what are the weeds doing?
What are the weeds doing? Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, whatever time of the day it is that you happen to be watching this recording. Um, one of the problems that I have with No May, it's not that it isn't a nice idea, but it was developed in a different part of the world than where we are. And for example, when you're talking about weeds that are in bloom in May when you're not mowing and trying to service the pollinators, well, the dandelions mostly bloom in April, and the clover mostly blooms, well, beginning about now. There's a lot of white clover in lawns right now, and not much of it is in bloom yet. But it isn't going to be long before you're going to start seeing, seas of white flowers from white clover. And actually, I have some research plots out at the OTF Center where I'm supposed to be looking at buckhorn plantain, and they've been completely overwhelmed with black medic. And so that is an annual weed, right? Whereas the white clover is a perennial. But we have a couple of the clover-like species that are beginning to bloom, and so we're going to start seeing those pretty easily here in the coming weeks. Um, Maybe you took care of the clover with your springtime broadleaf application. Hopefully you got the black medic too, but if not, and you have to do some spot spraying, just be aware that as has been pointed out, we're starting to see warmer temperatures, and sometimes that can create conditions that are not ideal for our broadleaf herbicides. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to apply those herbicides, preferably in the morning and on days when the high temperature is going to be 80 degrees or less. Now, there are some ester-based formulations of herbicides that are advertised to be effective up to 90 degrees. Generally, these are formulations where there's one low volatility ester combined with two or three amine-based active ingredients as well. While that labeling is correct, I still try to tell people when possible to spray when it's 80 degrees or less, just because those conditions decrease the chance that you're going to have premature evaporation or drying on the surface of the weed. Remember, one of the functions of control is how much of the herbicide can you get into the plant. And so if you spray when it's really hot and you turn around and the weed leaf surface is dry, 15 minutes later, that means you had 15 minutes to get the herbicide into the plant, which may or may not be enough time. So, and I absolutely have had demonstrations out here for Field Day in August. Are we doing a shameless plug for Field Day in August at the end of this? Where I've taken, like a generic three-way amine-based formulation and compared it to the best of the four-way herbicides that include esters. And if I spray those in the middle of the afternoon on a day that it's like 85 degrees, I actually get better control with the amine-based formulation. And I'm hypothesizing that that's because, the ester-based formulation just wasn't, it dried too quickly on the surface of the leaf. I'm starting to ramble aimlessly. My point is be careful when trying to control broadleaf weeds when it's too warm out, because in addition to maybe having less effective control on the weeds, you can have more effective control on the nearby ornamentals than you would like when you spray in those conditions. I did have a question last week what to do about these things, tree seedlings, right? So it's like you had all of those whirligigs from the maples and the cottonwood and everything else, and they're all now germinating. And how do we get rid of those? Well, any number of our broadleaf herbicides, for reasons just mentioned, will have some activity on these, but remember, you don't generally see trees growing in areas where you mow. And so, the mower will take care of this. It's just there's that unfortunate period of time where the tree saplings, while they're developing, stay below the mower height, for a couple of weeks, but eventually they will get tall enough that the mower will take care of them for you. Again, there is some effectiveness with herbicides, but the mower is the primary way that you should try to take care of those. With our friend poison hemlock, in addition to 2,4-D, I want to point out that triclopyr and or dicamba are also effective. I did have somebody reach out to me last week that said that they had effective control using triclopyr combined with Pylex. And that is a broad-based herbicide that we use primarily for grassy weed control, but it does have broadleaves on the label, but that's not one that is specifically mentioned on the Pylex label. So my thought is that it's probably the triclopyr that's doing all of the heavy lifting for control. But anyway, one of those three active ingredients will give you selective control of poison hemlock and turf. You can also use glyphosate in your landscaping beds, but if you're going to attempt mechanical control, make sure that you use gloves. It's not called poison hemlock just for nothing. Crabgrass is maybe a week behind where it was last year because let's face it, the last part of May wasn't the greatest, for growing conditions for our warm season grasses. But we are starting to notice crabgrass in areas that are closer to heat sinks like landscaping beds and concrete and things like that. I would caution that it's still a little too early if quinclorac is your active ingredient of choice for control. Um, and the reason that I say that is that it is highly effective on leaf stage crabgrass. So basically what it is now, but after crabgrass starts to tiller, it's really weird. You get shockingly ineffective control with quinclorac while crabgrass is actively tillering. But then when it reaches its pretty much mature size, then quinclorac becomes effective again. And so you can control the leaf stage crabgrass now, but then more crabgrass will germinate in those areas that were left by the controlled current crabgrass. So oftentimes it's better to just wait until July in order to attempt to control with quinclorac. Tepramazone is a little bit less sensitive to the growth stage. And I'll talk about this more as the season wears on, but the combination of quinclorac and tepramazone is actually probably the better idea when attempting to control crabgrass post-emergence. On a related note, if you see big fat leaves poking out of the ground right now, those are not crabgrass. That is likely field paspalum, which is becoming more prevalent in Ohio. And if that is the case, then tepramazone is the herbicide of choice. That's actually the only active ingredient that's effective for field paspalum control, at least in this part of the country. So you can control anytime, between now and August, 2 applications, 3 weeks apart. Again, for crabgrass, it's better to wait until July. I mean, even the people who sell quinclorac, manufacture it, say that the majority of their sales are after July 15th. And so, the half rate of quinclorac and the half rate of tepramazone or mesotrione is a good strategy for controlling those weeds. And that's what I have for today.
Fabulous, David. Hey, on your taxonomic ID process, you've mentioned both black meadow and clover. There is obviously oxalis. Can you just give people a quick run through of those three trifoliate weeds so they can pick out the differences if they so desire?
Now that you've said that, I'll use pictures next week. So 1 week from now, I'll use photographs. It's sometimes easier to describe now. Now, what's really interesting though is that since you said oxalis, that's actually not related to the clovers at all. It's a completely separate family of plants that's actually more closely related to roses than it is to clovers. But we treat them the same in our turf applications. But that and bird's foot trefoil. Thank you for the ideas and suggestions for 1 week from today. I'll use pictures.
I do my best, David. I do my best.
Dave, I have a request for next week. With all the hot weather, could you address moss in lawns? The wet weather. With all the wet weather we've had, can you address moss in lawns and what people could maybe do to culturally control moss in lawns?
There's an alarming percentage of our population that actually believes that that would be a more sustainable, suitable surface compared to turf grass. But yes, I'll mention that as well. Yes.
Come on, David. Dr. Wu.
Hello, everyone. Hope all's going well. This, as mentioned earlier, this spring has been bizarre, and we just finished our ABW sampling this Monday. And so it's kind of like all stages. Usually at this time, we tend to see more older instars and pupa. And this year, because of the fluctuating weather, and it seems like fins can be snow, and some early ones already approaching the pupa stage and old larva stage, and the later ones are still first, second stars. So that's a bit unusual. So those of you working on golf courses, you may notice that you have seen ABW damage in southern and central Ohio, and those ones in the northern state, you may have start to see a little bit yellowing of the grass, and or about to see that. So if you want to do a rescue treatment, you can still do that, because the majority of them are still in the larval stage. Other than that, you may want to watch out the early adult emergence in a week or two, in a few weeks, the new adults. But that will be gradually because of the difference in the development rate. And also I have two notices. One is about the nematode survey program. So for those of you participate in our nematode survey program in the golf courses, you may earlier this year, I shared the results about our survey and what we did last year. And earlier I said that we're going to do it this year again, but actually because of pending grant proposals, we're going to skip this year's survey on golf courses. So not this year, but next year. However, instead, we're interested in looking at in the sport fields what's going on, because lots of sport fields, they have renovated turf. So we want to know about the nematode populations there. So my lab created a neat survey on those sport fields. If you work in sport fields and you're interested about the nematode program, I will encourage you to take this survey. So I have to mention that this survey requires a password, because we don't want it to get confused with lawn cares or golf courses. So if you're interested in this survey, feel free to send me an email and I will share the password with you to do the survey. If we get good interest, we will do the survey this summer. And another thing I want to mention that is earlier I mentioned that I want to do a changeback trial. So I'm looking for a site testing the changebacks. And at this time, you're probably about to see the changeback damage on your lawn. They can show as yellowing of the grass in patches. Usually they're feeding from the center and disperse outward. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can do water flashing and just using water to look at if the tiny bugs floating on the surface. If you have this information, please reach out to me. Here's my contact information. I will be happy to come over to treat your lawn for you. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Free lawn treatments. Oh boy, that'll get a crowd. Pamela Sherratt.
Good morning, everyone. So as we've already mentioned, the conditions right now are ideal for cool season grass growth. And so I think lawns are looking great, sports fields and recreation areas looking great right now. And because of the sheer amount of moisture that we've had a lot of mowing. So mowing lawns twice a week, and of course sports fields several times a week. The lower the mowing height, the more times it needs to be mowed. So right now, what we need to do, if you're planning on putting out a fertilizer application on cool season grass right now, the one thing we're trying to do at this time of year is develop a root system, a strong root, and if they have rhizome system, so that those cool season grasses can survive the stress of the summer. We know that during the summer, when our soils get above about 70, 75 degrees, we lose about 50% of the root mass due to the soil temperatures, and the cool season grasses get severely stressed. So this time of year is an ideal time to try and precondition the grasses that we have to develop those deeper root systems. So be very judicious with watering and with nitrogen fertilizer at this time of year. always keep in mind that we're looking for, well aerated soil. We don't want excessive nitrogen, which would enhance leaf growth over root growth and rhizome growth. And obviously, we don't want to overwater again. When we overwater, and certainly when we have a lot of rain, what happens is our soils become saturated. Always keep in mind that our turf grasses roots grow in oxygen, they don't in air, they don't grow in water. And so we can, in saturated soils, the grasses don't grow. And also in saturated soils, the grasses cannot take up the nutrients from that soil. So sometimes we'll see in a very wet period in spring, even if you apply a fertilizer, the grass doesn't look like it's responded. And that is probably because the turf grass can't take up that nutrient in a saturated soil. So just keep that in mind this time of year. We don't want to overly apply certainly quick release nitrogen. So if you do want to apply a fertilizer if you need to have some recovery or trying to encourage density and color, a 30 to 50% slow release, ideally a 50% slow release of a balanced fertilizer or an organic source. The organic sources, again, are slow release. So that's just one thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about fertilizing this spring. The next thing I have, Ed, is that in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be starting to plan the sports turf track for the Ohio Turfgrass Conference. Britt Barry and I will be plugging in names and topics in the next couple of weeks. Sports turf managers that are watching, if you have an idea for a speaker or a topic, please reach out to me or Britt in the next 2 weeks, and we certainly appreciate your input on that for the upcoming conference. And then finally, I was with a master gardener yesterday, and she had a beautiful fine fescue lawn, but unfortunately had some red thread, and it was quite severe in some of the areas. And so I reached out to our pathologist, Todd, and he said that he would talk a little bit about that this morning. So that's all I have right now. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Pamela. There was a point I wanted to raise, but it's completely gone out of my head. Todd, take it over.
Good day, everybody. Well, usually when you see me laughing and smiling, that's not good for the rest of the people managing turf, because a happy turf pathologist means unhappy turf growers. And as I've been talking to you guys over the last couple of weeks, I've been warning people about this weather pattern that may show up, and lo and behold, it's here. Last 7 days or so, as everyone's pointed out, we've had some extreme weather where it's gotten really warm on us, and more importantly, it's gotten warm during night times, 65 to 68 degree nights. It was 69 degrees at 5:30 this morning in Delaware, Ohio. And with these storms, it's bringing in humidity, or it's left humidity, which is wonderful news for diseases and so forth, but not so much for you growing turf. So last 2 weeks or so, I've heard a lot of complaints and phone calls and emails and so forth on fine fescue and ryegrass being hammered with a red thread. People have asked me for homeowners what they should do. The first thing the homeowner should do is, if it's something you struggle with year to year, make sure you've got a good soil analysis so you know what kind of nutrition level you have there and whether there's some of the minor things that need to be taken care of. So a good fertility program is probably your best line of defense. Your second line of defense is switching over from something that's maybe a little more hardier against red thread, if that's a problem. And then finally, fungicides. And fungicides usually last for homeowners because they're cost prohibitive, and 99.9% of our fungicides are protectants. So in other words, you have to be way ahead of the disease putting down this fungicide to get the protection you need. So a lot of people aren't willing to be that proactive or spend that amount of money on fungicides. The other things that are blowing up on professional turf and home lawns, leaf spot. We've had the wet, and all you need's wet, because we have 2 times the leaf spots, warm and a cool season. They switch back and forth very readily. They can be quite devastating, and they look a lot like other problems, especially on shorter cut stuff on tees and greens. So that's eating people up left and right. Dollar spot has been seen already. It kind of went inactive. We got cooler there after last weekend's warm up, but with this warm up now and the weather we're having, I expect dollar spot, if you've got unprotected or weak turf, I expect it to show up and be quite damaging. And then the final thing that I'm waiting to get samples on is anthracnose. If you're managing a lot of poania and you're double cutting, and a lot of events are happening right now, opening weekend, stags, that sort of stuff, guys are double rolling, double cutting, having lots of play and stress on that POA. I think anthracnose, if you're not protected, will show up and eat you for lunch. As Pam talked about roots and stuff, every sample that I've got in has about 2-inch roots or less. That's right now. For golf, you've got about a week or so, maybe, of good growing weather for roots. And then what you have is what you have for the rest of the year. They're only going to get worse. They're only going to get shorter. So strengthen up what you've got. So for professional turf, I've been telling folks, if you're not on or you haven't started, get on your phosphite program. They do so much for plant health. They do so much to enhance your fungicide program. And the final word on diseases, I've talked to a lot of people in the high cut market because of the weather pattern. They're way behind on seedings, and they're not going to wait for spring. They can't. So they're going to be seeding into this middle towards the end of June, trying to get stuff drying out. Yeah, as looking, well, good luck with that. The one hint I'm going to tell you is get you something to put down fungicide wise when you seed. You're going to be adding water. There's already humidity, and you already have the right temperatures. Pythium's one of our few killers. There's no recovery from Pythium. If you get it, it's done, and you're starting over. So if you're forced to seed into this period of time that we don't recommend, but you got to, get something down to get you some protection for those seedlings. That's all I got for now, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Man, that fella hasn't been decked lethal in about 12 months, folks, just to make it clear. Happy pig. Hey, okay, a couple of points that I did need to clarify. Pam, you brought up slow release versus quick release. For the homeowners, things like urea and ammonium sulfate are going to be relatively quick release sources of nitrogen. And then if you see animal waste, animal biosolid, human biosolid, anything that's organic, that plant material based fertilizers, where you need to look for that is on the label, right? And on the front of the label or at the back on the bag, it will give you a description of whether there is 10%, 5%, 50% slow release materials, and then it breaks it down. So that's one. The other one, Todd brought up hardier materials against red thread. Specifically, Todd, you were talking about Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue, correct?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So you were talking about turfgrass species. And so we do see variability across turfgrass species with a range of diseases. As Todd loves to talk about dead POA with anthracnose, we don't see that as frequently across other species. So in this instance, for red thread, he's talking about the idea of trying to introduce tall fescue or Kentucky bluegrass as an alternative option. All right. Pamela has her hand up. Hand up.
So since we're talking about things we'll do next week, I think it would be helpful. Why don't I next week show a few different types of fertilizer label, and we can go through how to read one.
Fantastic. We'll have that as a pay-per-view. All right, Dr. Shetlar.
Well, I'll end up the gloom and doom, hopefully with a little brighter point. Typically, historically, when we've had this wetter than normal late May, early June window, the common bluegrass billbug damage usually doesn't appear. The turf will grow through it. Remember that the billbug larva runs down the seed head stem and kills the crown. But if the grass plant can develop tillers and those tillers can develop a root system, you won't see much damage. And so typically when we get hot and dry in late May and early June, that's when all hell breaks loose with the damage. But understand that just because we don't see the billbug damage doesn't mean the billbugs weren't successful in growing. And we are seeing across Ohio much more damage on the second generation of billbugs. But again, the good thing about that is that if you're applying a white grub control here in June, that would be the ideal time to also, those controls should catch the second generation of bluegrass billbug. So I think billbug season this year, we should be in fairly good shape. I am seeing in my light traps, finally, sod webworms are showing up. So the adults are flying. Sod webworms are not an issue in high cut turf, like in lawns and in sport fields. They're just a nuisance because you see these little moths flying up as you mow the lawn and whatever, but we don't see any damage. But we can commonly see damage from sod webworms on golf course greens and tees. But again, if the golf course superintendents have used one of the diamides, a Celiprin, Tetrino, or something like that, they should have season-long control of their caterpillars on their greens and tees, including sod webworms. Kind of on another point, there are some other nuisance things that are in the turf grass, and this wet weather has really allowed some of those nuisance pests to grow. I'm getting reports of people complaining about little ground beetles coming around and springtails. And both of those appreciate the wet weather. I'm not worried about either one of them. Obviously, the ground beetles are beneficial. We have two guilds of ground beetles, those that are seed eaters and those that are predators. Both of those are very common in the turf grass. And if they're getting into your house, what it's telling me is that you don't have good door seals. So check the sweeps on your doors and make sure those seals are functioning properly. When it comes to the springtails, I have one homeowner that's already applied 3 insecticide applications to her lawn, and she's still overrun by springtails. And I had to inform her most of our springtail species don't react very well to the typical pyrethroid insecticides, the neonics or the diamides that we apply. They're fairly resistant to those, and even if they are affected, they reproduce very rapidly and recover very rapidly. And so just pray for drier weather is about the only thing that we're going to control the springtails with. That's all I've got, Ed.
Thanks, Dr. Shetlar. All of you are so optimistic today. It's a fabulous setting. Look, the grass is growing. Do not mow the hell out of it and start raising your mowing heights. That'll do a lot for you to get through the rest of the summer, particularly in the home lawn sense. So just take it easy, calm down, carry on. We see you all next week.